So there's a side of Insomniac's success that a lot of people don't necessarily pay very close attention to. It is very interesting that this is something that whenever you might say it, a lot of people might think that it is actually out of the question. Insomniac has a very clever strategy of making their video games. Being veterans in the industry after so many years and making so many video games, you probably think that their ideas are quite solid and intact. So this video, we're going to look at Insomniac's strategy from a very, very surface level. There's not enough time to go into it. And we're going to see why it is that they're actually doing very well. Now, Insomniac's strategy is highlighted in a conversation that just took place here on Twitter. I was scrolling around the Twitters and I saw a developer, actually a senior environmental artist here at Sony Santa Monica, open up the floor for questions. His name is Dunny Carlone. Seems like a wonderful person because he basically says, I legitimately want gamers to have a better understanding / relationship with developers. This back and forth of mistrust, needs to end. We all love games. Let's at least start a healthy dialogue. Gamers / fans have questions. Ask them. I'll answer anything that doesn't violate my NDA. He took a series of questions, a lot of them, like you see a lot in the thread. But one of them stood out to me because I thought it kind of, in a sense, referenced exactly what it is Insomniac's strategy is. So check it out. This person, Rebel13, asks and says, what are your views and perhaps if you can provide insight as to why games are broken at launch? Last gen, it was huge day one patches. This gen has gotten worse, it seems. Now I know Insomniac's been bringing out clean performing games. That's not necessarily the point, but it lies in Danny's answer. He says, each generation, the quality bar becomes higher. Higher quality bar means more content to polish. Games are more expensive to make and larger too, which means more variables on bugs. In my opinion, I'd like to see shorter games. This would improve the stability and content within deadlines. The stability of content, within deadlines. You see this? In my opinion, I'd like to see shorter games. This would improve stability of content within deadlines. Ladies and gentlemen, Insomniac is already doing this. They're doing a hybrid version of it where they're not only bringing in, say, just shorter games, they're bringing a good mix of shorter and good length games. Their games are not overly long. You don't have to sit there and play thousands of hours of their game unless you want to, but they ensure that the games have a very decent length, and then some of them are just outright short. Like Spider-Man 2018, the game that they built a lot of systems for, not necessarily, in my opinion, from scratch. They already had a lot of expertise, but they had to actually make a convincing Spider-Man game in that time frame. But look at the sequel to that game, or the mid-sequel to that game, which is Miles Morales. It was unapologetically a shorter game. They made it so that they could meet the deadline for the PS5 release and also meet the deadline to release their game. A short game pretty much bridged the gap between that 2018 game and the 2023 game. And even when the gap seemed like it was going to be much longer, they went ahead and remastered the 2018 version of the game using a new face actor so that the game had something fresh, in its own right. And I thought that was actually really smart. Now, you might say, well, these were just a series of very simple cases. But you have to also understand that this is a theory that's been tested in the industry and has worked. If you look at Rocksteady, who is a studio that has benefited from these kinds of development cycles, you also realize that for the most part, the projects being somewhat, in quote, shorter helped Rocksteady to be able to rise and polish games and make very fun games for the most part. They were able to make the, Arkham games become very interesting games and very complex games by the time they reach Arkham Knight. So pretty much honing down their craft. But here's where I think Rocksteady did not necessarily make a strategic decision that worked to their advantage, or in today's day and age anyways, a decision like that would have probably been very cool. It's the fact that they're a one studio game. They sit and they work on one game and focus on that one game. Even Rockstar would not dare do that. Rockstar made a diverse, portfolio of games, and so did Insomniac themselves. This is why these studios are continuing to go a different direction. Now, Rockstar's games arguably take much longer to make, but they're making a game that is a sandbox, so we're not necessarily going to cite them too much nor compare a lot of what it is that they're doing in regard to their games. We're going to use Insomniac as the example today. Insomniac, on the other hand, having made this Spider-Man game, realized that we need to also continue to diversify so that we're not just a Spider-Man pumping studio like back in the day when the Beanox Spider-Man games were all flying out the shelves, and they decided that they were going to visit an old game in their library, which is Ratchet and Clank. Now, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is a very interesting game. I haven't played the game yet, but I know that it is a game that has been in Insomniac's library for many, many years. Seeing that they had this game in their library, they decided that they were going to go ahead and make a version of the game for the PlayStation 5. But ladies and gentlemen, guess what? The Ratchet and Clank game, this new one, Rift Apart, is actually a shorter game than one of the originals. In fact, it's highlighted here in an article that was written just a few days ago. This article is titled, "Insomniac is the model for what AAAs should look like." It's crazy because just yesterday, before seeing this article, a colleague and mine, we were talking about how a lot of AAA, studios are actually struggling. And he sent me a little screenshot of a 9-year veteran leaving a Ubisoft studio. And we were talking about Ubisoft and how it seems like right now things are quite interesting with them. But this article actually highlights something very critical to what it is that I'm saying that Insomniac is doing. It says this in this paragraph: "In a world where games keep getting bigger and longer," I wonder who talked about wanting to see shorter games. You see that? It says, "with exceptionally longer development cycles, Insomniac points to a different, better way. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart looks significantly prettier than the first Ratchet and Clank from 2002, and the power of the PS5 SSD allow it to incorporate mechanics that wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago. But the new Ratchet and Clank is roughly the same length as the first Ratchet and Clank. HLTB estimates that Rift Apart takes 11 hours if you just want to complete the main story, and 18 hours if you want to do everything the game offers. That actually makes Rift Apart shorter than the original game, which weighs in at 12 hours for the main story and 25 hours for a completionist run." Ladies and gentlemen, they understand this paradigm very well and have taken it into account and are actually implementing it in their games. I will not be surprised if Wolverine is arguably a short game in a sense as compared to, say, other superhero games. Maybe not super short, like 12 hours short, but somewhere around 20 hours or 22 hours. That to me provides a really decent median range that you can put a game where it doesn't feel significantly shorter than other games that are out there today. Why other game studios, or I say maybe game studios or publishers, or game studios and publishers, seem to struggle a lot is because they're constantly trying to make these extremely ambitious games. A game that takes you 240 hours to find everything. A Ubisoft open world game where everything is set all through the world and all these systems have to connect, rather than making a simple, straightforward game that is fun, that users can actually engage. We could even go further with other studios that are doing things like this, like From Software. Some of you may not necessarily know, but From Software's release titles are actually spaced out very, very sensibly. Now, arguably, they have a lot of veteran status, but you'll realize that it seems like the more the veteran status, the more sensible a lot of their releases are. We're going to take a small instance from somewhere around 2016 and run through 2023, and you're going to see that they are, even in this new generation of games, not necessarily missing a beat when it comes to their development. So look at 2015, where they're coming off of Dark Souls 2 for the PS4 and the Xbox One, Bloodborne, a Monster Hunter Diary game. This is a 3DS game. I've never seen nor heard of it. But in 2016, Dark Souls 3 was launched. They also launched a remaster, seemingly in 2018, possibly in my mind, to close that gap. I wonder who else launched a remaster in the middle of their first game and second game. Oh, wait, Insomniac. Then they made this game called Deracine. I don't know what it is. It's a PSVR game. And then 3 years later, or 2 years after a year after the remaster, of the Dark Souls game, then they dropped Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Sekiro was a game that won Game of the Year. People were enjoying the game. And then 3 years later, they dropped Elden Ring, a game that they already had been talking about. So there was a 3-year cycle there. But they did not stop there. Right after Elden Ring, you'll notice again that they're closing this gap with Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon, which is pretty much an adaptation of a new game from an old game that they have made years back. I wonder who's making adaptations of old games that they had made years back. It seems to me that Insomniac understands this pretty well. The secret to their success is not so much a secret, it's open for everybody to see, The question is, are many of these development studios or are their publishers going to let them take this approach? Rocksteady's organic and sensible next game should have been a Superman game, not what these execs in suits are making the studio develop. The Suicide Squad game seems to me like a decent idea, but they already were teasing a Superman game from the time that they started to even, talk about a lot of what they were doing. Even Arkham Knight is littered with all kinds of Superman possible references for the future. Them not making a Superman game already tells you that their corporate exec in charge of their studios, he's got zero vision. Know his name, but I don't want to say it in this video. But this is what you get when you don't have a unified vision. It's not Rocksteady's fault. They don't call the shots for the most part. But I think that the strategic, miss of not making a diverse portfolio at the time was probably what, in my opinion, kind of got them right now. Because if they had something of an offshoot, like a second game, they probably could have been able to use it to bridge that gap from 2015 all the way to possibly 2022, which was when this game was supposed to first release before it got another delay and now has another delay. But it is what it is. Thanks so much for watching. Peace out.